never had any idea how the Lord would lead as far as Fostoria Church came into being.
I came to Fostoria Baptist Church with my parents in 1968. We met at the Thatcher's house.
Mr. Thatcher always had a heart for Fostoria.
In my mind, I remember him talking about working second shift and not being able to meet for prayer meeting and midweek, things like that. And a couple of other guys as well had that situation. And there was a desire to do that. So I think as they began meeting together, they felt the need for a church in Fostoria.
There is no doubt that when one examines the history of Fostoria Baptist Church, that God has done a marvelous work in our midst. It is our desire to be a record of that work and to glorify God for His grace and goodness amongst the people of this local church over the past 50 years. Like any story, we must start at the beginning. 50 years ago. The year was 1968. Now, that year may sound menacing to many of you, as it should, as 1968 has been called by many sources the year that changed America. Several important events shocked this nation and showed just how needy we were as a people. First of all, in January, the Vietnam War escalates as a result of the Tet Offensive. Anti-war protests unfold all across America, many of which turn violent. College campuses especially become the repeated scene of anti-war demonstrations. In April, Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated, tearing the race issue open once again throughout the United States. Then on June 4th, Robert Kennedy is shot after winning the California primary, causing America to relive the horrors of President Kennedy's killing just a few years earlier. Many people undoubtedly began to wonder, this situation seems hopeless. Is God still in control? Although it might seem that all was hopeless, God was still at work. For on that same day, June 4th, 1968, God worked on the heart of Brother Don Thatcher to take the first step of starting a Bible-believing, gospel-preaching church in Fostoria, Michigan. He contacted several like-minded families, and that very next Sunday they began holding services in his home, situated here behind me.
Don Thatcher called me and asked what I thought about starting to work in Fostoria. So I said, yeah, that'd be all right with me.
Well, I was 9 years old when we left the church we were at, and Mr. Thatcher's always had a heart for Fostoria, so he called my dad. I remember the phone call, my dad talking to him, and he said, do you want to meet in my house for church next Sunday? And a few families went there.
He called the Galilean mission in Grand Rapids, told them that there was 7 families of us that would be starting the work. So he said, well, if you can keep the bunch together, I'll send you a pastor each Sunday. So there was 2 different fellas that either one or the other would come on Sunday then.
I think originally we met in their living room, and we met there for a while, then it got bigger. We met in the kids met in the garage for a while, but obviously by the time it got cold in Michigan, we couldn't meet there anymore, so then we started meeting in the basement, and it got bigger, so we met down in the basement.
In August, we called Pastor Hopkins as our first pastor.
Pastor Hopkins was a pastor when I was young. He had an impact on me because I was a kid, and he spent time with everybody, and he had children my age, so he was good with people.
As the church began meeting at the house, it didn't take too very long to begin to fill up the place, and the need was to look for another location. And so they began looking in the village of Fostoria and purchased an old, I think it was an old restaurant, and the house next to it, and the church began meeting there.
Yeah, that building was quite a few things. I remember it was a gas station because the water tasted like fuel. And I do remember everybody that was part of the congregation at the time did work on it. My dad and I think Mr. Thatcher and Mr. Straw were second shifters, so we would go during the day. While in the summer I went, pull a lot of nails.
Yeah.
And all the women worked with tools too.
It was only 20 by 50 downstairs and same upstairs. And we paid $5,500 for that house.
This is where I remember going to church. I remember meeting in the old house for the opening exercises of singing together and birthdays and all of that, you know, who had a birthday this week and all of that. Sunday school classes were in there as well for the young ones. Then church was meeting in the old building, the restaurant building next door. I remember in my mind the young people would meet for youth group and things upstairs, and the service was all held downstairs. And that went on for a number of years up until the mid 70s.
In 1972, Pastor Hopkins wanted to go back and finish his education, and so he resigned, and we called John Fields.
I went to a lot of churches. I went to the Free Methodist, I went to the Methodist, and they just wasn't giving me what I needed. I went forward when I was younger for salvation, and they just kept asking me, do you feel Jesus? And I goes, no. And finally I just got so embarrassed, I just got up and went in my seat and told them yes. But I think at that time the Lord knew my heart, and so He helped me to finally get it settled. But I was having a lot of emotional things going on in my life, and so I thought, I need to call a pastor. So I went through every minister, every Baptist there was in the book, and the only one that answered the call was Pastor Fields. And so he explained from the scriptures what salvation's all about. That was the first time I was actually able to understand. And so I even asked Pastor Fields, I said, so what do I have to do? And when he told me, I thought, it's that simple?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have to do anything else? I don't have to do this or that? And he says, oh no, it's just you and Jesus. I had had a lot of burdens going on, so it was like I had this heavy sack of 50-pound potatoes on my back, you know. And then as I'm walking past where the church used to be downtown, I went past there, and it was just like, your burdens are lifted at Calvary is the only song that came to my mind, because it was just like somebody had taken all that weight off me.
In 1973, we called Fred Kinkle, who was an older man. The work started growing under his ministry.
Pastor Kinkle, as I mentioned, he was always involved with the people, and he loved all of us, you could tell.
Pastor Fred Kinkle was a man who impacted all of us at that time, especially young people. He was a white-haired man, shorter, but a man that just always had a smile. He was faithful, and it didn't matter if you were young or old. He connected with from the top all the way down to the nursery.
In 1974, we started plans for a new church, so we started our building fund, and one of the members of the Galilean Mission, Richard Dix, was an architect. So he drew up the plans for the church, which only cost us $1,400. And that summer, we had 300 in Bible school. We had both houses filled, the fire hall was filled, the buses were filled.
I remember going to church down there and being quite crowded.
Yeah. And I remember Sunday school class, Dennis and I was in the same Sunday school class together, and there was probably 10 to 15 students in the room, and it was just a small upstairs room in a old building, you know, so it was pretty crowded, but it was enjoyable time, and her dad was the Sunday school teacher. I don't know if that's how I got to know her or not, but I think it is.
that building began to be overloaded with people, you know, it was packed out.
We had to look for land, and Don and I looked, and finally one day when he was out calling with Pastor Kinkle, and they was coming down Fostoria Road, and he says, "Pastor, what do you think about putting a church on that land right there?"
My dad had always talked about a side business, kind of a thing he wanted to do, an investment, and that was to build one of those self-service car washes in Fostoria. He purchased the land, and that was part of the reason for that, and that was what he had intended to do there in the 70s, and the need became very apparent and obvious that the church had to expand.
So he donated 5 acres to us to build the church on. We had $32,000 in our building fund, and the Galilean Mission loaned us $90,000. We started building in May of that year. Well, we hired the masons and the electricians and the plumbers. The rest was all volunteer help.
Well, I was a teenager and everybody did work too. We had by the nursery, there was a big open area, and I remember as a teenager we all got together and sanded the cement block walls. And that was a dirty job.
You know, we had a bulldozer and used it to peel back the sod, and we started that building, and it was all hands on deck.
The inside of the building was completed on September the 12th of 1976. We had $146,000 in the building and a paved parking lot. And in 3 years, it was completely paid for.
1975, June, I think it was, end of June, I got saved. It wasn't until the next year, in 76, we had the bicentennial celebration. I believe it was the first service we had here at this church. And I remember there wasn't any carpeting yet in the auditorium. We had 8 baptized that day. I remember I was in there, and I know Paul Kelly was one of the fellows that was baptized that day. And I remember Paul being in there and having his 76 garb on. It was pretty neat to see the older clothing that people wore that day because of the celebration time.
My wife and I, we were going to church at the Catholic Church in Mayville at St. Joe's. The population there was about 180. Here they were running about 180 in this congregation. I told my wife one day, I said, well, we're going to try a test here. We're going to check out the Catholic Church in Mayville and see how many people come in carrying their Bible with them. And then we're going to do the same thing at the Baptist Church. First we went up there, ladies were coming in, the men and everything, but one old lady comes in carrying a family Catholic Bible. Great big thick thing, great big. One lady come carrying a Bible into church. And we came here, and out of the 180, 179 came in with a Bible, and one person didn't come in. So that was the difference between the Catholic Church and the Baptist Church. So I looked at my wife, I said, we're going to go to church here.
An ice storm hit. So I think that was all the Lord's leading there. Who comes and visits us? It's Pastor Kinkle. He's such a warm, inviting person. John says, what do you preach on there, And he said, well, actually, I'm doing a study on Revelations. And John was all into this Revelation thing, Yeah. And so that's what we did. So we went there, and he says, wow, they actually teach the Bible. I says, I told you.
I've always been in church all my life. I was a Lutheran. Whenever the door was open, we were there for everything. I didn't know what to think about. The preacher, when I came here, he wasn't wearing a robe. He had a three-piece suit on. It was Pastor Kinko. And that's who I got saved under. I was under conviction a long time before I ever went forward. I couldn't take the invitations. He would go to work on Sunday, and so I would sneak out of church because kids were coming home on the bus. And when invitation time came, I would leave. But finally, I went forward, and it was just like there was a load lifted off of my back when I finally went forward and got saved.
Well, Fostoria Baptist Church has been my life ever since we started it. We got saved 3 months after we was married, and church has always been first in our lives. Our family was second, and farm was third. It's plain enough to be seen that the Lord was in it all the way.
Well, there was a couple things that happened that, as a child, it was amazing to me. I remember one time, and I do not remember who the man was, but I remember the Holy Spirit working on him, and him, no, I'm not going to be able to say it, him going up the aisle crying to get saved.
And it's remained the same. It's not changed. Everybody wants to change music and everything, but our church has not changed. It's still the same yesterday as it is today, and it's great that we still have a doctrine that we had then.
There was some rough times, but the Lord always has His will and brings it back.